The night was black, the river swollen, and the old bridge groaned under the storm's fury. When it snapped, everyone thought it was over. But as the girl's scream echoed through the torrent, the soldier's K9 leapt into the current without hesitation. The storm had begun as a whisper, a drizzle on rooftops, a sigh in the trees. By nightfall, that whisper had swelled into a roar. Silver Creek, the quiet little town tucked between hills and valleys, had never seen rain like this. Streets turned into rivers, culverts overflowed, and the steady hum of water was broken only by the cracking of trees giving way under the wind. Sergeant Daniel Ward stood on the porch of the rescue outpost, reins sluicing off his jacket, eyes fixed on the trembling arc of the old Miller's Bridge in the distance. That bridge had stood for 80 years, patched, repaired, and painted a dozen times. But the years had been unkind, and tonight's storm showed no mercy. Beside him, Rex, his German shepherd, trained for search and rescue, stood alert, ears pricked, amber eyes locked on the same bridge. The dog's coat was soaked through, but his stance never wavered. Daniel reached down and brushed his hand over Rex's head. "Easy, boy. Stay sharp." The radio on his shoulder crackled. "Ward, we've got a call. Reports say a car stalled mid-bridge. Occupants trapped." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Copy," he said sharply. He clipped the radio back, tightened the straps on his waterproof pack, and snapped Rex's harness leash. The wind howled as they pushed toward the bridge. The street was a mess of debris, trash cans overturned, branches swept across asphalt, and rivulets of water rushing down every gutter. Overhead, lightning carved jagged lines across the sky, illuminating the skeletal silhouette of the Miller's Bridge. By the time they reached the riverbank, the scene was chaos. The bridge sagged in the middle, beams creaking as floodwaters slammed against its supports. Halfway across, a small sedan sat tilted at a dangerous angle, water already swirling around its tires. Inside, Daniel could just make out movement, frantic hands slapping the windows. "Hang on," he shouted, though he knew his voice couldn't carry over the thunder. Rex barked, his deep, commanding voice rising above the storm as if to say, "We're here. Don't give up." Daniel edged onto the bridge cautiously. Every step groaned under his boots, the planks slick with rain and trembling with the strain of holding together. His training screamed at him, this bridge was minutes from giving out. Maybe less. But there was no other way. The sedan's windows fogged with breath and fear. A girl, no older than 12, pressed her palms against the glass, eyes wide and wet. Next to her, a man, likely her father, struggled with the door handle, but the current pressed too hard against the car, pinning it in place. "Don't move," Daniel commanded, raising his hand. "I'm coming." Rex growled low, muscles taut, his body sensing the danger more keenly than Daniel ever could. That was when the sound came, a sharp, splitting crack that sliced through the storm. Daniel's blood ran cold. He whipped his head around just in time to see one of the main support beams twist under pressure. The bridge lurched, and a section behind them splintered into the churning river below. "Go, go, go!" Daniel urged, sprinting forward, Rex bounding at his side. They were only 10 feet from the sedan when the entire structure gave a final groan like an animal in pain. And then, it snapped. The world seemed to tilt. The car jerked sideways, breaking free of what little grip it had. With a metallic screech, it slid toward the river, the girl's scream piercing the storm. Daniel lunged forward, arms outstretched, but the sedan tumbled off the edge in a spray of water and vanished into the current. "No!" Daniel roared, his heart seizing. He dropped to his knees at the edge, staring into the maelstrom where the car had disappeared. The river was a monster tonight, swollen and wild, swallowing everything in its path. The chance of survival was near zero. But Rex didn't hesitate. The instant the scream rose from the water, a fragile, desperate cry carried between waves, the shepherd launched himself off the edge. His body arced against the lightning-lit sky, a dark silhouette diving headfirst into chaos. "Rex!" Daniel's shout tore from his throat, raw and powerless. He could only watch as his partner vanished beneath the black water, swallowed whole by the current. The river raged on, uncaring. But somewhere beneath the surface, a loyal dog fought for breath, for strength, for the girl's fading voice. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. He had seen Rex drag soldiers from burning buildings, find survivors buried under rubble, and hold his ground against forces no human would dare face. If anyone could beat the river, even for just one more life, it was Rex. But this time, the stakes were higher. This time, the storm wasn't just testing a dog's loyalty. It was testing a bond forged in fire, blood, and unbreakable trust. And the night had only just begun. The river answered with teeth. Daniel's breath came in hard bursts as he pushed back from the splintered brink, scanning the dark water for any sign of Rex. Lightning forked across the sky and turned the flood into molten steel for a heartbeat, and in that flash he thought he saw movement, something dark circling a whirl near the downstream bend. Then the night swallowed it. "Rex," he shouted again, useless against the roaring current. The name broke in the rain and flew away. Training kicked in, steadying the panic. If he jumped blind, the river would take 2 of them. If he froze, it would take 3. He forced himself to move. He spun, sprinting along the fractured span, boots skidding on soaked planks, until he reached the abutment where the bridge met stone. A rusted utility box jutted from the railing, old maintenance cache. He wrenched it open. Inside, a coil of frayed rope, a bent carabiner, a cracked floodlight with a dying battery. He grabbed everything, looped the rope around his torso, and clipped it with the carabiner to his pack's anchor loop. Not ideal. Not safe. But better than nothing. On the road behind him, voices rose, a pair of figures blinking through rain, flashlights bobbing. A volunteer firefighter in a yellow slicker and a teenager in a Letterman jacket skidded to a stop at the barricade tape that whipped like a flag. "Sergeant Ward," the firefighter shouted, pushing the tape aside. "Chief sent us to back you up. The South Trail gives access to the bend." "Good," Daniel barked. "I need a fixed anchor, tree, guardrail, anything that'll hold 300 pounds under a jerk. I'm going in online. You," he pointed to the teen, "keep that light on the water, 10 degrees wide sweep, slow. If you see a dog or a kid, yell and keep that beam steady." The boy nodded, throat working. "Why yes, sir." "Names?" "Pete," the firefighter said. "This is Nolan. He's my neighbor." "Pete, Nolan, Rex is in there. There's a girl too, maybe 12. Car went off the midspan. We don't have minutes, maybe seconds. Move." They ran together along the road, cutting down the muddy slope that switched back to the river path. The ground slid under their feet, clay turning to grease. Daniel half surfed, half stumbled, one hand on the rope coil and the other bracing against saplings. The river's roar grew deeper, closer, an engine of water grinding the valley. At the bottom, willows whipped like frightened animals. The trail vanished into flood. In the beam of Nolan's flashlight, Daniel saw the bend open out like a mouth, the current shredding around a half-submerged snag, the trunk of an ancient cottonwood ripped from the bank, its roots clawing at nothing. Debris slammed it and spun away, coolers, shingles, a trash bin, something that looked too much like the hood of a car. Daniel's chest tightened. "There," he said, pointing. "Anchor line here." He tossed the rope around the fattest willow and yanked to test it. The bark squealed but held. He doubled the coil and tied a bowline around his waist, then a quick backup knot for spite. He clipped the carabiner, checked it twice, then looked up at Pete. "If the tree goes, I go. If I go diagonally, don't try to haul me upstream, you'll lose the line. Angle to the bank. You got that?" Pete set himself, boots digging into mud, rope wrapped around his hips for a body belay. Got it. Say it again if you want me to shoot the moon, I'm not letting go. Nolan stood to Daniel's right, flashlight trembling. He swallowed, then forced his hand steady, sweeping the beam the way Daniel had said. I don't see, wait. No, just a log. Daniel tuned out the rest. He took 3 measured breaths, closed his eyes for 1 heartbeat, and pictured Rex, the dog's face when he learned a new command, the way he leaned against Daniel's leg when the nightmares tightened into fists. Find, Daniel whispered into the river's spray. Hold. Then he stepped into the flood. The water tried to climb him, rip him to pieces, take him apart bone by bone. Cold slammed his chest like a hammer, squeezing the air out. He ducked, feeling the current muscle past his shoulders, and kicked out at a diagonal to avoid being dragged straight down. The rope jerked as it took his weight. He pulled in a rhythm, 2 kicks, 1 reach, 2 kicks, 1 reach, fighting the river's desire to spin him. The beam from Nolan's light jittered somewhere on his left, slicing pale bars across the rain. He kept his eyes low, scanning for the triangular line that meant ahead, the V-wake of something alive. A shape burst up 5 yards downstream, coughed, sank. Daniel heard himself snarl and lunged. The rope yanked his waist and bit into muscle. He dragged himself along it, sight fixed on that patch of water. Rex, he roared, and for a brutal second the current formed a window. In it, teeth. Not bared in threat, but clamped around the sleeve. A slim arm attached to the sleeve. A small face blue-white in the lightning flash, eyes glassy with terror. And beside it, a dark head whipped by spray, ears plastered back, the dog's body straining as he fought to keep that arm above water. I've got you. Daniel slammed into them. The river tried to roll all 3. Daniel hooked his left arm around the girl's chest, pinning her to him. The cold shocked her inhalation into a choking sob. Hold on, he said, mouth to her ear, not sure the words existed outside his skull. He reached for Rex with his right hand and found harness straps slick with water. Rex's jaws shifted, searching for a better grip, unwilling to release the fabric in case the current snatched it away. Rex, out! Daniel commanded, voice clipped. Even now, trained habit cut through chaos. Rex released the sleeve instantly and shoved his head against Daniel's fist, presenting the harness handle. Daniel seized it, locking his hand through the loop, and felt a shudder of relief. Contact. Team. Pete, reset the anchor, Daniel said, checking the knots. I'm going back in, 50 yards downstream. The car might have jammed against the cottonwood or rolled again. If I go under more than 10 seconds, you haul the line whether I like it or not. You sure? Pete asked, voice hoarse. No, Daniel said honestly, and met his eyes. But he's in there. A shout cut from the trail above, thin, distant, swallowed by wind. Another responder? Or just the storm playing tricks? Daniel listened, head cocked like Rex's. There it was again, to the east, beyond the bend. Not a shout. A honk. Short, metallic, intermittent. A horn. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound. The car, he breathed. The current had carried it past the cottonwood and into the eddy by the old riprap wall. If the horn was still working, the battery wasn't dead. If the battery wasn't dead, he could be alive, Nolan said, eyes huge. Daniel didn't say maybe. He didn't say if. He just ran. He grabbed the rope, signaled Pete to feed slack, and plunged back into the black mouth of the current. Rex leapt beside him like a shadow stitched to his side. The river swallowed them both again, but the line held, and the horn cried out once more in the dark, a stubborn heartbeat in a night that had tried to stop all of them. They angled across the flow toward the sound. Debris clipped Daniel's shoulders, glanced off his helmet, battered his thighs. He felt the line hum as Pete matched his movement, giving slack without surrendering control. The floodlight on the bank swung and found a shape in the eddy, a hunkered, half-submerged silhouette rocked by waves, windshield a shimmer of green glass. "Back window!" Daniel shouted, fighting to keep his mouth above water. "Rex, hold!" Rex shifted position, bracing against the car's rear quarter like a living wedge, using his weight to keep Daniel from being slammed against it. Daniel dove, fingers seeking the seam of the trunk, the handle, anything. His lungs flamed. He surfaced, gasped, dove again, and felt his glove touch cold metal, then nothing, then the jagged softness of weather stripping giving way. He burst up, chest on fire. "I can break it," he barked to himself more than anyone. "We can get him." A gloved hand appeared at his shoulder. Pete, rope looped around his waist now too, having made the stupid, brave decision to come 3 steps deeper. He slapped something into Daniel's palm, a spring-loaded window punch he'd pulled from a pocket Daniel hadn't seen. "Make it count." Daniel took 1 breath. 2. He went under. The water crushed around his skull, tried to fold his shoulders. The sedan's back window showed his own face for a ghost moment, then the punch kissed glass with a tiny, insolent click. Spiderwebs bloomed. He hit again. The web thickened. Again. The window surrendered all at once, shattering inward into the car like brittle ice. Water sluiced in and tried to suck him with it. He braced his boots against the bumper and shoved an arm through the hole, groping for a seatbelt, a jacket, a human line. His hand closed on something warm. Daniel's fingers locked like a trap. He yanked, twisted, and felt a shoulder roll under his grip. The current tried to rip the man from his hand. He roared into the river and pulled harder, cursing the flood, the night, the bridge, the fate that thought it could have one more. Rex pressed against his hip, the dog's body an anchor he hadn't known he needed until it was there. Daniel used the harness loop again, braced, and pulled. The man, Maya's father, came out of the dark like an accusation and a promise. His head lolled, eyes closed, mouth slack. Daniel crushed his jaw in one hand and pinched his nose, blowing 2 breaths quick and hard into the slack mouth while water tried to steal both. "Breathe," he ordered like a sergeant. "Now." He kicked. Pete hauled. The rope sang. The horn went silent. The river did not care. But the 3 of them, man, dog, soldier, did. And together, inch by brutal inch, they beat the current back toward the living. The world narrowed to the weight in Daniel's hands. Maya's father felt heavier than a man should, dead weight with waterlogged clothes, every limb dragging like an anchor. Daniel's lungs screamed for air, his muscles quivered with exhaustion, but he refused to let go. Each second mattered. Each second was the line between saving this man and watching another family collapse under the river's cruelty. "Hold him steady," Pete bellowed above the roar. The firefighter's voice cracked with strain as he leaned back into the rope, body a counterweight against the current. His boots slipped in the mud, but he dug in harder, refusing to yield. Daniel shoved upward with every ounce of strength, breaking the man's head above the surface. "He's not breathing," Daniel shouted, half choking on river spray. "Get him in," Pete barked. Rex paddled at Daniel's flank, pressing his body into the soldier's side to help bear the burden. The shepherd's growl was low and constant, vibrating like a drumbeat beneath the chaos, as though sheer willpower alone could defy the current. Every time Daniel faltered, Rex surged closer, lending that extra fraction of force to keep the man's chin above the waterline. The rope jerked. The team on shore, Nolan's pale arms straining at the belay, hauled as though dragging the river itself. Inch by inch, they gained ground. Daniel's legs scraped rocks, knees buckling as the water tried to topple him, but he planted himself again, lungs burning with the taste of iron and grit. Come on," he muttered, voice raw, eyes locked on the slack face of Maya's father. "Stay with me, Damn it. The shoreline loomed closer. Muddy bank, thrashing willows, Nolan screaming encouragement through his own fear. Then hands seized the unconscious man under the shoulders, yanking him out of Daniel's grasp. Pete was there, rolling the father onto the bank, fingers already checking for a pulse. Daniel collapsed sideways, face sinking halfway into mud before Rex barreled against him, nudging, barking, refusing to let him stop. Daniel spat dirt and river water, forced his body up, and crawled to the man's side. Nothing. Pete rasped, ear to the man's mouth. His eyes flashed wide with panic. No breath, no pulse. Daniel's training clicked into place like a switch flipping. Get me space, he barked. He knelt hard by the man's chest, placed 2 hands over the sternum, and began compressions. Each push sent water spurting from the man's lips. 1, 2, 3, 4, Daniel counted, steady, firm, refusing to let his rhythm break. 30, breath, he snapped. Pete tilted the man's head while Daniel pinched the nose and sealed his mouth over the others. 2 breaths forced into lungs that felt like balloons filled with sand. Daniel pulled back, water and spit dripping down his chin. Again. Maya's sob reached them then, thin and terrified from under the firefighter's coat. Daddy! Daddy, wake up! Her little body shook as Nolan held her shoulders tight, whispering, He's okay, they've got him, he's okay, though his voice wavered like he was trying to convince himself. Daniel bore down harder. Stay with me, he growled through gritted teeth, pumping rhythm into the man's chest. You told her to keep her head up, you don't get to quit now. He forced another round of breaths, then slammed his palms down in renewed compressions. His arms burned, his back spasmed, but he leaned his whole weight into each push. Somewhere in the rhythm he became a machine. Compress, 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 breathe. Again. Again. Rain beat on his helmet, thunder rattled the valley, but none of it mattered. Only this man's heart. And then, there. A cough. A sputter. The man convulsed, hacking river water out of his lungs in a violent spray. His body arched, gagged, and collapsed sideways, sucking ragged breaths like someone who had been held underwater far too long. He's back. Pete roared, relief cracking through his exhaustion. He's breathing. Maya shrieked with joy, tearing from Nolan's grip and stumbling toward her father. She collapsed at his side, clutching his wet jacket with both fists, sobbing into his chest. The man's eyes flickered open, glazed, confused, but when they landed on his daughter, something lit inside them. His hand twitched, found hers, squeezed weakly. Daniel sagged backward, every ounce of strength bleeding out in that moment. He dragged in a lungful of air, chest heaving, vision blurring with rain and tears he refused to acknowledge. Rex shoved his muzzle under Daniel's hand, demanding touch, grounding him back into reality. Daniel stroked the dog's head with a trembling palm. Good boy, he rasped, voice breaking. You saved them. You did it. Pete wiped a hand across his rain-soaked face, shoulders slumping with relief. EMS is on the way. We need to keep them both warm until they get here. Nolan, blankets, now. The teenagers scrambled to the supply kit near the rope anchor, pulling out silver emergency blankets. He ran back, draping one over Maya's trembling shoulders and another over her father's shivering frame. The foil crinkled loudly against the storm, but it trapped precious heat, slowing the chill that threatened to claim them both. Pulse? Daniel asked hoarsely. Thready, but steady, Pete confirmed, pressing fingers against the man's neck. He's gonna make it. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second, whispered something only Rex could hear, and then forced himself upright. His knees quaked, but he refused to show weakness, not with Maya's terrified eyes watching him, not with Nolan's face full of awe, not with Rex still standing tall despite his soaked, battered body. The radio on Daniel's shoulder crackled alive. Unit 4, status update, a dispatcher's voice demanded. Daniel thumbed the mic. Unit 4, juvenile recovered, conscious, hypothermic but stable. Adult male recovered, required resuscitation, currently breathing on his own, vitals shallow. Both awaiting EMS transport at South Bend Access. Request urgent pickup, river still rising, bridge fully collapsed. Over. Static hissed, then the reply, copy, Unit 4. EMS en route with rescue boat and medics, ETA 10 minutes. Hold position. Daniel clipped the mic back and exhaled. 10 minutes. They just had to hold on for 10 minutes. The problem was, the storm wasn't finished. The ground trembled as another chunk of the collapsed bridge tore free upstream and slammed into the river like a battering ram. The current surged higher, frothing dangerously close to their position on the bank. Debris, whole sections of railing, jagged planks, hurtled downstream with lethal speed. One log slammed into the cottonwood snag, snapping a massive limb that whirled dangerously close before spinning away. Pete's face hardened. This bank won't hold long. If the water rises another foot, we'll lose the trail. Daniel scanned the surroundings, calculating. They were boxed in, steep slope behind them, river in front, collapsing bridge upstream. And EMS had to find them in this mess. Signal, Daniel said sharply. Nolan, flashlight, strobe at 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse for SOS. Keep it high. The boy obeyed instantly, aiming the beam into the storm and pulsing it desperately toward the ridge. Rex barked once, sharp and commanding, as though adding his own flair into the night. The minutes dragged like hours. Maya clung to her father, whispering through her tears. Pete crouched low, keeping pressure on the man's side to steady his breathing. Nolan kept his arm raised, light flickering against the black. Daniel never stopped scanning the river, muscles tight, knowing storms never gave victories without asking for more. Finally, lights. Red strobes in the distance, weaving through rain like fireflies. A spotlight cut across the water, then again, closer. The rescue boat surged into view, its engine straining against the flood. A pair of medics huddled low in the hull, while another rescuer on the prow waved, shouting something Daniel couldn't hear. Daniel's chest eased slightly. They'd made it. Against all odds, they'd bought enough time. But the night wasn't over. Because as the boat maneuvered toward their bank, Rex's ears shot forward. The shepherd growled, body stiff, gaze locked not on the rescuers, but upstream, toward the shattered skeleton of the bridge. Daniel followed his line of sight, and his blood froze. Another car. Headlights glowed through sheets of rain, angled down the slope where a driver had tried to skirt the barricades. The vehicle lurched dangerously close to the broken edge of the road, tires sliding on mud. The driver, unaware or panicked, was about to plunge straight into the river. Daniel surged to his feet. No, he breathed. Not again. The storm had saved one family just long enough to threaten another. The headlights carved through the storm like twin daggers, white beams bouncing across the fractured asphalt. Daniel's stomach turned as he realized what he was seeing, the impossible stupidity of a driver ignoring the barricades, trying to push through the danger zone. The car fishtailed, tires screaming against slick mud, its rear end swinging dangerously toward the ravine where the bridge used to be. For a second, the headlights illuminated the jagged remains of timber jutting from the river, and then the vehicle lurched forward again. Another one. Pete shouted, voice breaking with disbelief. Why would anyone? Nolan's words died in his throat. His flashlight wavered, caught between signaling the rescuers on the boat and the oncoming disaster above. Probably panicked, Daniel snapped. He rose to his full height, rain streaming down his face, boots sinking into mud. Or thought they could beat the storm. Doesn't matter. If they keep moving, they'll go straight into the river. The rescue boat had nearly reached their bank, engine roaring against the torrent, spotlight fixed on the small group. The lead rescuer, a woman in a red flotation vest, looked from Daniel to the road above and saw the same thing he did. She shouted into her radio, frantic hand signals cutting through the night. The medic beside her was already preparing rope lines, but Daniel knew the boat would never reach the road in time. The driver's headlights flashed again as the car swerved dangerously close to the cliff edge. For a split second, Daniel caught sight of a pale face behind the glass, eyes wide, hands gripping the steering wheel in a white-knuckle death grip. "Rex!" Daniel barked. The shepherd was already moving, body taut like a coiled spring, hackles up. He darted toward the slope, barking furiously as though his voice alone could warn the driver. But the car didn't stop. It jerked sideways, front wheels spinning helplessly, mud spraying in an arc. Daniel didn't think. He ran. His legs screamed with fatigue, his chest still tight from the river, but adrenaline was a drug and duty a whip. He sprinted up the muddy incline, grabbing branches and roots to keep from sliding back. Every step sent sharp pain up his shin where the submerged branch had clipped him earlier, but he pushed harder, faster. "Stay with Maya," he shouted over his shoulder at Pete. "Keep her father breathing." He heard Rex's claws scrabbling on the mud beside him, the dog matching his every move, barking relentlessly at the car above. The vehicle's rear wheels spun, lost traction, and suddenly the nose dipped. Metal screeched as the front bumper scraped against the broken edge of the road. The car teetered, balanced between earth and abyss. The headlights swung down to the river, casting eerie light across the surging water. Daniel threw himself forward, sliding the last 10 feet, mud caking his uniform. He slammed shoulder first into the driver's side door just as the vehicle tilted farther. "Put it in park," he bellowed, pounding the glass. "Brake! Hold it steady." The driver, a man in his 30s, panicked beyond reason, was shouting something, his words muffled by the storm and glass. He jerked the gear shift, stomped the brake, but the tires only spun uselessly against the slick surface. Rex leapt up, paws battering the door, snarling at the invisible danger of the river yawning below. The dog's weight rocked the car slightly, and Daniel cursed, pulling him back by the harness. "Not yet, boy. Not like this." He glanced around desperately. The slope offered nothing but mud and shattered concrete. No anchor point for a rope, no railing left to grab. Just slick ground and a doomed car. The vehicle slid another inch. The sound was a metallic groan, an animal's death rattle. Daniel slammed his fist against the glass again, shouting, "Window! Roll it down!" The driver fumbled with the crank, an older model car, blessedly without the complication of electric windows that could short in water. The glass screeched down halfway before jamming. Rain poured in, and the man shoved his hand through, reaching wildly. Daniel grabbed his wrist. The man's grip was slippery, frantic, clawing. "Listen to me." Daniel roared over the storm. "Do not panic. You move when I say. Understand?" The man's head bobbed, jerky with terror. "Rex, brace," Daniel commanded. The shepherd barked once, sharp, and planted his body against Daniel's side, providing balance on the muddy slope. The car shifted again, the nose dipping lower. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. "Now," he barked, yanking with all his strength. The driver squeezed through the half-open window, shoulders scraping metal. For a horrifying second he was wedged, chest stuck, legs flailing inside. The car groaned louder, sliding another half-foot. Daniel hooked his arm under the man's armpit, locked his grip, and heaved with a roar. Muscles screamed, old scars tore open inside his chest, but inch by inch the driver came free. He toppled into Daniel, slamming them both into the mud. The car rocked violently, then with a screech and a final shudder, it pitched forward into the abyss. Daniel and the driver rolled aside just in time to avoid being dragged with it. They watched as the vehicle plunged nose-first into the river, headlights vanishing under the churning black. The sound was a gunshot of water and tearing metal. The driver wailed, burying his face in the mud, hands clutching his head. Oh God, I thought, his voice broke into sobs. Daniel staggered upright, every bone shaking, and dragged the man to his feet by the collar. You almost killed yourself, he snarled, breath hot with fury. You almost killed all of us. You see the barricades, you stop. Do you understand me? The man nodded wildly, tears mixing with rain. Rex barked again, tugging at Daniel's sleeve. The shepherd's gaze was fixed downstream where the car had vanished. Daniel followed his eyes, heart sinking. The vehicle was gone, but debris from the crash surged toward the rescue boat. A twisted section of bumper, still tethered by cables, hurtled straight for the vessel's side. Boat! Daniel shouted, waving his arms wildly. Incoming debris! The rescuer on the prow caught his warning just in time. She barked an order, and the pilot gunned the engine, swinging the boat hard to the side. The bumper slammed past, missing them by mere feet, then spun into the torrent downstream. The boat steadied, then angled toward the bank again. The rescuers waved frantically, urging Daniel and the driver down the slope. Move! Daniel commanded, half dragging the man. Mud slid under their boots, but Rex darted ahead, testing each path, leading them down safely. When they reached the bank, Pete had Maya and her father ready, both bundled in foil blankets. The medics jumped ashore from the boat, rushing with stretchers. Get the girl first, Daniel ordered, pointing. She's hypothermic but stable. Her father needs oxygen, he was pulseless for several minutes. Priority transport. The medics nodded, lifting the father onto a stretcher while another medic wrapped Maya carefully. The girl reached out blindly, her fingers brushing Daniel's sleeve. He caught her hand, gave it one firm squeeze. He's alive because of you, he told her softly. You kept your head up. Remember that. Her lips trembled, but she managed a tiny nod. The rescuers loaded both stretchers onto the boat. Nolan helped steady them, his flashlight beam steady now, no longer trembling. Pete clapped Daniel's shoulder, eyes fierce with exhausted gratitude. You saved them all, Sergeant. Daniel shook his head, gaze sliding to Rex, who stood soaked and trembling but unbowed. No, he said quietly. We did. As the boat pushed off, carrying Maya and her father into the storm toward safety, Daniel's shoulders finally sagged. For the first time since the bridge snapped, he let himself feel the weight of what they had survived. But the night wasn't finished. Because even as the rescue boat's lights faded into the storm, the sound of sirens rose from the ridge behind them, more units arriving, more chaos to confront. And the river, swollen and hungry, still thundered on, as though daring them to believe this was over. Daniel laid his hand on Rex's soaked fur. The dog pressed against him, warm despite the rain, eyes locked on the raging black water. Together, they stood on the edge of ruin, waiting for whatever the storm threw next. The sirens grew louder, echoing through the valley like wolves baying against the storm. Red and blue lights slashed across the ridge, fractured by sheets of rain. Daniel squinted up at them, mud dripping from his chin, every muscle in his body screaming for rest. But rest was a luxury the river wasn't giving tonight. More vehicles were arriving, fire engines, an ambulance, even a county sheriff's SUV grinding to a halt against the barricades. Their headlights cut harsh beams into the chaos, illuminating the broken skeleton of the bridge and the raging current below. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to believe the worst was over. Maya and her father were alive. The reckless driver had been pulled back from the edge. The rescue boat was carrying the wounded to safety. Then the radio on his shoulder hissed. Unit 4, be advised, County reports multiple calls upstream. Secondary landslide has blocked Highway 16. We've got additional vehicles possibly swept into the river. You may see debris and potential survivors coming down toward your sector. Over. Daniel's eyes snapped open wide. His gut tightened. Copy, he answered, voice flat but edged with urgency. He looked at Pete, who was still anchoring the rope line with Nolan's help. We're not done. Not by a long shot. Pete swore under his breath, shaking rain out of his eyes. How many vehicles? Doesn't matter, Daniel cut him off. If they're in the water, they'll be here fast. He turned to Nolan. Stay sharp. Keep sweeping with that light. Call out anything you see. Nolan nodded quickly, his face pale but determined. Rex was already pacing the bank, hackles bristling, gaze locked upstream. His instincts were tuned to the current like a living sensor. He barked once, sharp and urgent. Daniel followed his line of sight, and his heart dropped. Floating toward them, illuminated by the jagged flash of lightning, was a minivan. Its roof was barely above the surface, water curling over the windshield as it bobbed like a coffin in the torrent. Oh no, Nolan's voice cracked. Daniel's boots shifted automatically into position. He didn't hesitate. Rope, he barked. Pete scrambled to coil the remaining line, but Daniel shook his head. Not enough length, we'll need to intercept from the bank. Intercept? Pete's eyes went wide. That thing's moving like a missile. Daniel was already sprinting along the bank, Rex tearing ahead of him. Exactly. We stop it before the river takes it under. The slope was slick, but Daniel's body moved on instinct, weaving around brush and roots, feet slamming mud. Rex barked continuously, guiding his path like a beacon. The minivan was spinning sideways now, caught in a vicious eddy that sent it hurtling toward the cottonwood snag. Daniel! Pete shouted from behind. You'll get crushed. Not if we hit it first. Daniel's reply was torn away by the wind. He reached a half-submerged outcrop, a jutting slab of concrete where an old drainage pipe had once anchored the bank. The van was spinning directly toward it. Daniel didn't think. He dove, Rex leaping with him. The cold punched him in the chest again, his body instantly numb. But his hands found metal, the warped roof rack of the minivan. It jolted his shoulders nearly out of socket, but he held on, boots kicking for purchase. The van lurched, shoving him against the slab. Pain flared white in his ribs, but he ignored it. Rex, hold, he commanded. The shepherd lunged, teeth finding the van's side mirror. He clamped down and anchored himself against the current, growling low as water battered his body. Daniel gasped, coughing water from his lungs. He yanked himself toward the window. Lightning flashed, and for one horrifying second he saw faces inside, two of them. A woman in the driver's seat, eyes wide with terror, and a toddler strapped in a car seat behind her. The child's tiny fists beat against the air, mouth open in a silent scream. God help us, Daniel muttered. Then louder, ma'am. I'm here. Hold on. The woman's hand slapped the glass, frantic. The window was only halfway open, jammed by debris. Water poured in through the crack, filling the cabin inch by inch. Pete! Daniel roared, voice breaking. Get that punch. Now! The firefighter was already running, rope trailing from his waist. He splashed into the river beside Daniel and slammed the spring-loaded tool into his palm. Do it fast. Daniel nodded once, drew a single breath, and dove. The current hammered him against the side of the van, but he braced one boot on the door handle and jabbed the punch into the glass. Click. A spiderweb bloomed. Again. Click. The web widened. The third strike shattered the pane. Water surged into the cabin in a violent rush. The woman screamed, reaching for her child. Daniel shoved an arm through, seizing her wrist. Out now, he ordered, dragging her toward the hole. She kicked, fought, squeezed through the opening. Pete grabbed her under the arms, hauling her to the surface. Daniel went back for the child. The car seat straps were twisted, his fingers fumbling underwater. His lungs burned, vision sparking. Come on, he cursed, ripping at the harness. At last it snapped free. He cradled the child against his chest and kicked upward. He broke the surface with a gasp, shoving the boy into Rex's harness handle. Take, he barked. The shepherd immediately angled toward the bank, dragging the child like a lifeline. Nolan, screaming, ran waist-deep into the shallows to scoop the boy into his arms. Daniel turned back just as the van shifted violently. Its rear dipped, swallowed by the current. He barely had time to grab the roof rack before it sank, dragging him down with it. Daniel! Pete's voice tore through the storm. Daniel's grip slipped, the water wrenching him deeper. Darkness closed over his head. For a second, it felt like the river had won. But then something slammed against his chest. Not debris, Rex. The dog dove under, teeth catching Daniel's harness strap. With a brutal wrench, Rex pulled, hauling Daniel upward with raw animal strength. Daniel's head broke the surface, lungs dragging in sweet air as Pete's hands closed around his arm, yanking him toward the slab. They collapsed against the concrete, coughing, heaving, gasping like men who had wrestled the river itself. On shore, the woman sobbed into her child-soaked hair, clutching him so tightly it looked as though she'd never let go again. Nolan held the flashlight beam steady, his young face hardening with something new, resolve. Pete rolled onto his back, laughing breathlessly despite the bruises blooming across his ribs. You're insane, he wheezed at Daniel. Absolutely insane. Daniel spat out river water and dragged his hand across Rex's soaked fur, pressing his forehead against the dog's for one fleeting moment. No, he rasped. We just don't quit. But the storm wasn't finished. Because even as they clambered back to the bank, sirens wailed again from the ridge, longer, louder, more desperate. And above the roar of the river, a new sound carried on the wind, a groan of shifting earth. Daniel froze. He knew that sound. A landslide. Upstream. Headed straight for them. The earth itself seemed to groan. Daniel froze mid-breath, head cocked toward the ridgeline. It wasn't thunder this time, it was deeper, slower, a grinding growl that rolled down the valley like the belly of a beast. Rex stiffened beside him, ears pinned back, eyes darting toward the slope above. The shepherd barked once, sharp, urgent, then shifted into a whine that set Daniel's teeth on edge. Pete heard it too. His face went pale as lightning streaked across the ridge. In that split-second flash, the saturated slope gleamed like wet oil. Then the entire hillside began to move. Landslide. Pete bellowed, shoving Nolan backward. The sound hit an instant later, an avalanche roar of earth and stone tearing loose. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Mud, rocks, and debris surged down the slope in a black wall, swallowing everything in its path. The storm had carved its next weapon, and it was coming straight for them. Move! Daniel roared. He grabbed Nolan by the collar and shoved him toward the lower trail. Pete lunged for the woman and her toddler, hauling them to their feet. Go! Run! The riverbank dissolved into chaos. Sirens blared from above as rescue crews shouted warnings. But there was no outrunning the slope if it caught them on open ground. The mudslide thundered toward the bank, the kind of force that could erase a house in seconds. Daniel's brain raced. Options, he needed options. Downstream? Too exposed. Uphill? Too slow. That left only the river. Into the current. Daniel snapped, grabbing Pete's arm as the firefighter spun to protest. It'll kill us slower than that will. He pointed at the oncoming wall of earth. Pete's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He shoved the woman and child toward Daniel. "Take them." Daniel hauled the toddler into his chest, clamping one arm around the boy's tiny body. With the other, he gripped the woman's wrist. "Hold tight. Don't let go, no matter what." Rex barked again and hurled himself into the water without hesitation. Daniel and the others followed, plunging into the freezing black as the slope behind them gave way. The shock of the current stole Daniel's breath, but adrenaline drove him forward. He kicked hard, angling them downstream, fighting to keep the child's head above the chop. Mud and debris splashed around them, the river suddenly thicker, dirtier, angrier. Behind him, the landslide hit the river with an explosion of sound. Water surged upward, a wave of mud and stone chasing them like a monster's hand. "Keep moving!" Daniel roared, spitting water. Pete swam beside the woman, shoving her forward every time she faltered. Nolan thrashed wildly but stayed close, his flashlight gone but his determination unshaken. The wave caught them anyway. It lifted their bodies and hurled them forward like ragdolls. Daniel tightened his grip on the child, clamping his jaw shut as mud filled his nostrils. He felt rocks scrape his back, branches slam against his arms. The woman screamed, her voice breaking into bubbles. Rex surged past, cutting through the water like a blade. The shepherd's jaws snapped around the woman's sleeve, dragging her up each time the river tried to claim her. His body banged against debris, but he refused to let go. "Good boy," Daniel rasped, though he knew Rex couldn't hear him under the roar. Another crash, this time, a fallen tree slammed into their path, spinning sideways in the current. Daniel had a split second to act. He twisted, shoving the woman and child to the left while Pete yanked Nolan right. The log thundered between them, missing Daniel's head by inches. The current shoved them into an eddy near the cottonwood snag. For one moment, Daniel thought they'd be pinned. But Rex was already there, claws digging into half-submerged roots, hauling himself and the woman onto the tangle. Daniel slammed the child onto the same perch, gasping as his arms trembled with exhaustion. Pete dragged Nolan to the roots too, his face a grim mask of mud and blood from a fresh cut on his forehead. "Roll call," he barked through panting breaths. "Boys here," Daniel wheezed, patting the toddler against his chest. The child sobbed, eyes wide but alive. "Woman's here," Pete confirmed, helping her hook her arms around the roots. "Nolan?" "I'm fine." Nolan gasped, coughing water. His voice cracked, but he was still conscious, still fighting. "Rex?" Daniel turned. The shepherd was wedged against the roots, chest heaving, water streaming off his battered coat. He shook once, then barked, sharp and insistent. He was still in the fight. Daniel allowed himself one breath of relief, then the river surged again, pounding at the roots. The cottonwood groaned, its massive trunk straining against the flood. "This won't hold long," Daniel said flatly. Pete's eyes flicked upstream, where the slide had already widened the river into a churning sea of debris. "We've got maybe minutes before it rips the whole tree out." Daniel scanned frantically. The opposite bank rose higher, lined with jagged stone. There, an old maintenance ladder bolted into the rock, half submerged, rusted but intact. If they could reach it, they might climb to safety. He pointed. "There. We make for the ladder." The woman shook her head wildly. I can't swim anymore." Daniel cut her off. "You don't have to. Rex and I will get you there. Just hold on." Rex barked as if to second the command. Pete nodded grimly. "I'll bring Nolan. We do it together." "On your call." Daniel pulled the child tighter against his chest. "All right. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They launched as one. The current immediately tried to tear them apart, but Rex powered forward, his body cutting a line toward the ladder. Daniel followed, kicking until his muscles screamed, dragging the boy with him. Behind, Pete shoved Nolan onward, the teenager flailing but refusing to quit. Lightning split the sky, revealing the ladder just feet away now. Rusted rungs gleamed orange in the stormlight. Almost there. Daniel grunted. He rammed his free hand against the rung, fingers locking on cold metal. He shoved the child upward into Rex's waiting grip. The shepherd clamped his jaws carefully on the boy's jacket, pulling him onto the lowest rung. "Climb," Daniel commanded. The boy obeyed, scrambling upward with desperate energy. The woman reached next, her hands shaking, nails scraping metal. Daniel shoved from below, boosting her until Pete grabbed her waist and helped steady her onto the ladder. Nolan followed, Pete anchoring his back. Daniel hauled himself last, Rex leaping beside him to catch a rung with his paws. The shepherd clung like a cat, muscles trembling, but Daniel hooked an arm around him and dragged him upward step by brutal step. Below them, the cottonwood roots tore free with a snap like thunder. The tree spun away, dragged under, gone in seconds. The group clung to the ladder, rain beating down, river raging below. Step by agonizing step, they climbed higher until they reached a narrow ledge of rock. They collapsed there, gasping, shaking, mud-soaked but alive. Daniel lay flat on his back, Rex curled against his side, both their chests heaving in unison. He stared at the black sky, feeling every bone ache, every scar scream. But when he turned his head, he saw the boy breathing, the woman clutching him close, Nolan staring out at the stone with new steel in his eyes, Pete nodding once in grim acknowledgement. They were alive. For now. But in the distance, the sirens hadn't stopped. And over the storm, Daniel heard another sound, voices shouting, panicked, coming from farther downstream. More survivors. More lives at stake. The night wasn't over. The ledge was nothing more than a shelf of stone, slick with moss and rain, barely wide enough for all of them to crouch without sliding back toward the abyss. Every muscle in Daniel's body screamed for him to collapse, to let the storm have the rest of the night. But the shouts carried downstream, thin, broken by the wind, but unmistakably human. Rex lifted his head, ears pricked, eyes narrowing toward the sound. A guttural bark tore from his chest, sharp and insistent. He knew what it meant, more people. More danger. Daniel forced himself upright, leaning heavily on the ladder's rusted rung before pulling to his feet. He winced as his shin flared with pain again, but ignored it. He swept his gaze over the others. Maya's mother sat huddled against the rock face, clutching her son in a death grip, her lips moving in silent prayer. Pete leaned forward on his knees, blood trickling from the cut on his forehead but his eyes still steady. Nolan knelt nearby, soaked to the bone, his flashlight long gone but his jaw set in grim determination. "We're not alone out here," Daniel said hoarsely. "Someone else needs us." Pete's head snapped up. "Downstream?" Daniel nodded. Voices. Could be trapped against debris. Could be in the current. Nolan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "We can't just stay here, right?" Daniel's gaze softened for a split second. The kid was scared out of his mind, but he hadn't quit once. "No," Daniel said simply. "We can't." The woman's voice cracked. "Please, my son." Her arms tightened around the boy, whose small body shook violently beneath the foil blanket. "We can't move him again. He's too cold." Daniel crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes through the sheets of rain. "You stay here. Hold this ledge. Rescue teams are upstream, they'll reach you once the water stabilizes. Don't climb, don't move. You'll be safer here than anywhere else right now." She shook her head, eyes wild. "And you? You'll die if you go back down there." Daniel glanced at Rex, who was pacing the ledge, barking toward the downstream cries. "Then we'll die trying," he said simply. "Because those voices don't have anyone else." Pete pushed himself upright with a grunt. "You're not going alone." I didn't plan to, Daniel answered. His voice was raw, but steady. Pete clapped Nolan's shoulder. You're staying here. Guard them. You hear me? Nolan opened his mouth to argue, then shut it, face pale. He looked at Maya's mother, at the toddler shivering against her chest, and nodded. I'll keep them safe. Daniel squeezed his shoulder briefly. Good man. Then he turned to Rex. The shepherd's amber eyes gleamed in the lightning, every line of his body taut with readiness. Daniel crouched and pressed his forehead against Rex's, the ritual that had steadied them in every deployment, every mission. Find them, Daniel whispered. Bring me to them. Rex growled low, then bounded toward the ladder, eager despite exhaustion. Daniel followed, and Pete right behind. They climbed down, step by step, until their boots splashed back into the current's edge. The river had changed again. The landslide had thickened it with mud, wood, and stone. It foamed and boiled, every wave carrying the weight of destruction. The shouts downstream rose louder now, multiple voices, overlapping, some weak, some frantic. Daniel and Pete pushed forward along the bank, mud sucking at their boots. Rex surged ahead, nose low, barking in short bursts as he followed the human scent on the wind. They rounded a bend, and the sight froze them both. A bus. It was a small school transport, yellow paint smeared with mud, half submerged at an angle against a tangle of uprooted trees. The windshield was cracked, water surging in through the broken glass. Inside, figures pressed against the windows, children, at least half a dozen of them, their tiny palms slapping frantically. A man, likely the driver, was trying to force the emergency exit open at the back, but the river pinned it shut. Oh, God, Pete breathed. Kids. Daniel's chest clenched, but there was no time for fear. Rope, he barked, already shrugging his pack off to free what remained of their line. He scanned the wreck. The bus was wedged, but the current was chewing at its base. It wouldn't hold long. Rex launched into the water without hesitation, swimming hard toward the rear where the driver struggled. The shepherd barked in the man's face, teeth snapping near his hands until the driver looked up, startled, eyes locking on Daniel. Daniel cupped his hands and roared, "Hold on. We're coming." Pete was already hammering a piton into the nearest stone outcrop with a half-buried rock, improvising an anchor. He clipped the rope through his carabiner, tied a hasty knot, and yanked it tight. Line's good. Daniel clipped in, looped the rope around his waist, and plunged into the current again. Cold wrapped him like chains, but he fought forward, Rex guiding him with powerful strokes. The bus loomed larger with every kick, the children's cries piercing through the storm. He reached the rear door, braced himself against the frame, and tried to wrench the handle. It didn't budge. He slammed his shoulder against it, grunting with effort. Still nothing. The driver's face was gray with exhaustion. It's jammed, he screamed over the roar. It won't open. Daniel's eyes darted across the bus. The side windows were too narrow, the front nearly underwater. His gaze landed on the roof hatch, a square of metal and rubber, standard for emergencies. Rex. Daniel barked, pointing upward. Up. The shepherd paddled to the top, claws scrabbling against wet metal. He barked furiously, drawing the children's attention upward. Small hands pointed, eyes widening. They understood. Daniel hauled himself up after Rex, fingers clawing for purchase on the slippery roof. The hatch handle resisted, swollen with water pressure, but he planted both boots and heaved. With a shriek of metal, it popped. A flood of muddy water gushed out, nearly knocking him back. Tiny faces appeared in the opening. A boy's sobbing voice broke through, "Help us." Daniel reached down, grabbing the first child under the arms. He hauled him up, passed him to Rex, who steadied the boy by letting him cling to his harness. Then another child. Then another. Each one shivering, crying, but alive. Pete shouted from the bank, "Get them across the rope." Daniel nodded and clipped each child one by one to the line, shoving them toward the bank where Pete hauled them to safety. His muscles screamed with the effort, but he didn't stop. The bus groaned under his feet, shifting ominously as the current battered it. "Faster!" Pete yelled. Daniel dragged another child out, then another. The last was a girl with braids, no more than 8 years old. She was paralyzed with fear, fingers locked on the seat back. Daniel crawled inside, water up to his chest now, and pried her loose. "It's okay," he whispered, pulling her tight against him. "I've got you." Rex barked sharply, as if to reassure her too. The girl clung to Daniel's neck as he shoved upward, forcing her through the hatch. Then the bus lurched. "Go!" Daniel roared, shoving the girl onto the roof. He scrambled after her, Rex snarling as the vehicle groaned and tilted. The driver was still inside, waist-deep in water, shouting, "The kids, are they out?" "All but you!" Daniel shouted back. "Move!" The man shook his head, coughing. "I can't swim." Daniel cursed, clipped the rope to his harness again, and dropped inside. The water surged higher, pressing him against the ceiling. He shoved the driver upward, forcing him through the hatch as the bus tilted dangerously. "Go!" Daniel barked again, lungs burning. The driver disappeared through the hatch. Daniel followed, dragging himself onto the roof as the bus gave one final groan and shifted in the current. "Rex, out!" Daniel commanded. The shepherd leapt clear just as the bus tore free of the logjam, spinning sideways before plunging into the deeper channel. Daniel threw himself into the river, dragging the rope with him. The bus vanished downstream in a boil of water and mud. Hands grabbed the line from shore, yanking them across. Daniel kicked weakly, muscles barely obeying. Then Pete's grip closed on his arm, hauling him onto the bank. Rex scrambled out beside him, collapsing against Daniel's chest. Children cried in the arms of rescuers, the driver sobbing into his hands. Pete clapped Daniel's shoulder, voice breaking. "You're a madman, but you just saved a whole bus full of kids." Daniel coughed, spat mud, and buried his face in Rex's wet fur. "Not me," he whispered hoarsely. "Us." But the storm's fury still raged, and Daniel knew the night wasn't close to finished. For a long, shuddering moment, the only sound was children crying. The bus had vanished downstream, swallowed whole by the flood, but its absence left behind a silence that cut through even the storm's roar. Daniel sat hunched forward on the mud-slick bank, hands buried in Rex's sodden fur. The shepherd leaned into him, chest heaving, every breath a reminder they were both still alive. Pete staggered to his feet, his uniform torn and caked with grime. He pressed his palms against his knees, staring at the cluster of children huddled under silver blankets. Some sobbed into each other's shoulders, others sat rigid, shock freezing their small faces. The driver knelt among them, rocking back and forth, his lips moving in prayer or apology, it was hard to tell which. Daniel forced himself to stand. His legs trembled, his ribs ached, but his voice was steady. "We can't stay here. The riverbank's unstable, and if that landslide's pressure builds, we'll lose this ground too." Pete swore under his breath, glancing up the slope where the ridge still bled mud into the current. "Where do we take them? Back up the ladder?" Daniel shook his head. "Not safe. That ledge won't hold all of us. We need higher ground, solid ground. And fast." Nolan scrambled down from the ledge, splashing through the shallows to rejoin them. His face was streaked with mud, but his eyes were bright with something fiercer than fear. "There's an old ranger station upstream," he blurted. "Stone building, built into the bluff. We hiked past it last summer. My dad said it was abandoned, but the foundation looked solid. It's above the flood line." Daniel locked eyes with him. "How far?" "Half a mile, maybe less if we cut through the tree line." Pete grunted. "Half a mile through this?" He gestured to the mud, the slick rocks, the sheets of rain. Daniel didn't hesitate. "It's our best shot." He turned to the children, crouching so his eyes were level with theirs. "Listen to me. We're going to walk together, one line, holding hands. You don't stop, you don't wander. You keep your eyes on the person in front of you, and you keep moving. Understand?" A few nodded, others just stared, wide-eyed. Daniel softened his tone. "Rex will lead the way. He won't let anything happen to you. Right, boy?" Rex barked once, deep and commanding, and for the first time the children's faces flickered with a spark of belief. The trek began. They moved in a shaky line, Daniel at the front with Rex, Pete at the rear, Nolan darting along the side to keep the stragglers steady. The driver clung to two of the smaller kids, his guilt transmuted into frantic protectiveness. The forest was no refuge. Branches whipped under the wind, rain turned the ground to slime, and the sound of the river never left their ears, a constant reminder of what hunted them from below. Twice, the ground gave way beneath Daniel's boots, forcing him to yank a child back before the slope swallowed them. Rex never wavered. He padded at the front, head low, tail stiff, pausing at every hazard to bark once, a warning signal Daniel had learned to trust. The shepherd's instincts were sharper than any map. But danger wasn't finished with them. Halfway through the trek, a distant crack split the night. Daniel's heart seized. He whipped his head toward the sound just in time to see another tree, massive, ancient, snap at its base and topple across their path. "Down!" Daniel roared, throwing himself over two children. The tree smashed into the mud just yards ahead, splattering them with muck and debris. Screams rose, high and terrified. One boy tried to bolt, but Nolan lunged, wrapping his arms around him. "No! Stay with us," the teen shouted, voice raw but steady. Daniel pulled himself up, coughing. "Everyone all right?" A chorus of shaky voices answered. No one was hurt, but the path was blocked. The tree lay like a barricade, branches snarling together into a wall. "We go over," Pete said grimly. Daniel scanned it, calculating. The trunk was wide, slick, but climbable with care. One at a time. "Slow. I'll help them up. Rex, guard the rear until everyone's over." The shepherd barked once and trotted back, positioning himself beside Pete. The climb was chaos. Mud slicked every handhold, small shoes slipped on wet bark, and the children's cries grew louder with each attempt. Daniel lifted, shoved, hauled, every muscle on fire. Twice he nearly lost his grip, once nearly dropped a child, but Rex's bark and Pete's steadying hands kept them moving. Finally, all of them scrambled across. Daniel swung himself over last, Rex leaping easily behind him. But the delay had cost them. The river's roar was louder now, closer, as if chasing them through the trees. Daniel glanced back once, and his blood ran cold. Water was pouring through the forest. Not just rain runoff, but a surge, a breaker spilling from the collapsed upstream bank. It rolled like a tidal wave through the underbrush, snapping branches, devouring everything. "Run!" Daniel shouted. The group broke into a stumbling sprint. Children cried, Nolan shouted encouragement, Pete carried one kid over his shoulder. Daniel pushed them harder, Rex barking furiously as if snapping at the heels of the flood itself. Through the sheets of rain, Daniel saw it, the ranger station. A squat, stone building, roof sagging but walls still intact, perched on a rise above the flood line. Its windows glowed faintly, reflecting lightning. "There," he roared. "Go!" The last 100 feet felt like eternity. Mud sucked at their boots, the roar of the water swelled behind them. Rex darted ahead, lunging up the steps and barking at the door. Daniel shoved the children forward, one after another, until Nolan slammed his shoulder into the door. It creaked, resisted, then burst inward. They poured inside, collapsing on the stone floor. The room smelled of dust and mildew, but it was dry, solid, safe, for now. The children huddled together, sobbing into each other's shoulders. The driver collapsed against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. Daniel staggered to the doorway, bracing himself against the frame. Rex pressed against his leg, panting, eyes still sharp. Together, they watched as the wave thundered past, swallowing the forest where they had stood moments before. Pete slumped beside him, breathing hard. "We made it," he rasped. "By God, we actually made it." Daniel didn't answer. His gaze stayed on the flood outside, the storm still raging, the valley still under siege. He reached down, stroking Rex's soaked fur. The shepherd leaned into his touch, steady and unyielding. "We're not finished yet," Daniel murmured. "Not until every voice out there goes silent." And as if to prove him right, faint cries carried again on the wind, distant, desperate, from somewhere deeper in the valley. Rex's ears twitched. He growled, low and certain. Daniel's jaw tightened. The storm hadn't run out of victims. And he and Rex hadn't run out of fight. The ranger station groaned under the storm's weight. Rain hammered its sagging roof like fists, and every gust of wind rattled the warped shutters on its few small windows. Inside, the air was thick with fear, children huddled shoulder to shoulder in silver blankets, the driver whispering prayers, the woman clutching her toddler so tightly his face was buried against her chest. But Daniel didn't let his eyes rest on them for long. He stood at the cracked doorway, scanning the black forest beyond. The cries were still there, faint, distorted by distance and wind, but real. They rose and fell with the gusts, desperate, human. Rex pressed against his leg, amber eyes fixed in the same direction. His ears flicked forward, his body taut like a bowstring. The shepherd growled low, the sound vibrating against Daniel's calf. "They're out there," Daniel muttered. Pete staggered to his side, still dripping river water, a streak of dried mud on his cheek. "You're telling me after pulling 2 kids from a van, reviving a drowning father, and saving a busload of children, you're going back out there?" His tone wasn't disbelief, it was grim resignation. Daniel turned his head slightly. "Would you leave them to die?" Pete cursed under his breath and raked a hand through his wet hair. "I knew you were going to say that." Behind them, Nolan straightened. His face was pale, but there was steel in his voice now. "I'll go." The firefighter shook his head. "Not a chance. You stay here with them. They need someone steady." "I am steady," Nolan shot back, voice breaking slightly but not faltering. "I kept the light on. I helped. I'm not sitting here while people scream for help." Daniel studied him for a beat. He saw the boy's fear, but more than that, he saw fire. Courage untested but real. He crouched until his eyes met Nolan's. "If you come, you listen. You follow every order. No heroics. Understand?" Nolan swallowed hard, then nodded. Daniel rose. "Pete, we'll need more rope." "Rope?" Pete scoffed. "We're out. The last of it went with the bus." Daniel scanned the ranger station. In the dim light, his eyes landed on a rotting supply cabinet shoved against the wall. He yanked it open. Inside, dust-coated coils of climbing rope, frayed but intact, a box of pitons, and even a weather harness. Old, but usable. "Well, I'll be damned," Pete muttered. "Guess this station's good for something." Daniel slung the rope over his shoulder and clipped carabiners to his belt. He tightened Rex's harness, checking every strap despite the shepherd's impatient shifting. "Fine," he whispered. "Lead." Rex barked sharply, as if to say finally. The woman rose weakly. "Don't go," she pleaded. "You've done enough. Please, don't." Daniel met her eyes. If those were your cries out there, would you want us to stop? Her lips quivered, but she didn't answer. She just hugged her boy tighter and sat back down. They stepped out into the storm. The air outside was colder now, metallic with the smell of churned mud. The rain came sideways, 1,000 needles against their faces. The forest below the station was unrecognizable, half drowned, branches twisted into snarls, earth gouged open by the landslide. The river was louder, too, swollen higher than before, its surface writhing with debris. Rex trotted ahead, nose low, barking intermittently to keep their focus. Daniel and Pete followed, Nolan close behind, his hands white-knuckled around the spare rope he carried. The cries grew clearer as they descended the slope. They weren't random, there was rhythm, a call and response. Survivors shouting to one another, clinging to the hope that someone could hear. Daniel pushed forward, feet sinking ankle-deep in muck, every step a fight. Lightning split the sky, and there, in the brief flare, he saw them. A collapsed house, torn from its foundation, jammed sideways against the rocks. Its roof was half gone, its walls cracked, but inside, faces. A woman at a broken window, waving frantically, and behind her, at least 3 children pressed against the wall. "They're trapped," Daniel said. Pete grimaced. "If that house shifts any farther, it's going under." Rex barked furiously, circling the wreck like a wolf circling prey. His body language was clear, now. "Hurry." Daniel uncoiled the rope, jamming a piton into a nearby boulder and clipping his harness. "I'll go in." "Pete, you anchor." "Nolan, you're my eyes out here. If that structure moves, you scream." Nolan nodded, his jaw tight. Daniel plunged into the water again, rope taut around his waist. The current fought him, shoving him sideways, but he forced his way to the wreck. The woman at the window sobbed when she saw him. "Help us. Please." "Back up," he ordered, slamming his elbow against the frame until the rottenwood splintered. He shoved the window open and hauled himself inside. The stench of river mud hit him like a fist. The floor tilted under his boots, creaking with every shift of the current. 3 children huddled in a corner, eyes wide with terror. The woman clutched the youngest, tears streaking through the grime on her face. "You're safe now," Daniel said firmly. "One at a time. We'll get you out." He unclipped from his rope and tied it around the first child's waist. "Hold on tight. Don't let go." He hauled the boy to the window and passed him to Pete, who dragged him to safety. Then the second child. Then the third. The woman shook her head as Daniel reached for her. "Take them first. I'll stay." "They're out," Daniel snapped. "Now it's your turn." But before he could move her, the house shuddered. A massive groan tore through the structure as the current ripped at its base. "Daniel!" Nolan screamed from outside. "It's breaking free." The floor tilted sharply. Daniel seized the woman around the waist and shoved her toward the window. "Go!" Pete grabbed her arms and yanked her through just as the house lurched again. "Daniel!" Pete roared, reaching back inside. But Daniel didn't move. His eyes darted across the collapsing interior, and he froze. In the corner, half hidden under a broken beam, was another figure. Small. Still. A child no one had seen. "Damn it," Daniel hissed. He dove across the buckling floor, braced his shoulder, and heaved the beam aside. The girl beneath it whimpered, her tiny body soaked and trembling. "I've got you," he whispered, scooping her into his arms. The house tilted again, this time violently. The window slammed shut behind him, swallowed by water. The current surged through the floor, lifting him off his feet. "Daniel!" Pete's voice tore through the storm. Rex leapt from the bank, hitting the roof of the collapsing house with a splash. He barked, desperate, eyes locked on his partner. The building groaned one last time, and then it gave way, tearing free of the rocks and spinning into the river, carrying Daniel, Rex, and the child into the torrent. The world turned upside down. One moment Daniel was inside the broken house clutching the child, the next he was swallowed whole by the river. Wood splintered around him as the structure twisted apart, beams snapping like bones. The current spun him sideways, slammed him into a wall, tore at his grip on the girl. She screamed, a high, choked sound, before icy water filled her mouth. "No!" Daniel roared, locking his arm tighter around her small body. "I've got you. I won't let go." The flood didn't care. It twisted them, pulled them down, tried to pry his arms apart. Darkness closed around him, the current crushing from every side. For a heartbeat he thought he'd lost her, then Rex was there. The shepherd burst through the spray like a shadow with teeth, jaws snapping around the girl's torn sleeve. Not hurting, not letting go, anchoring. His body battered against debris, his eyes never leaving Daniel's. Together, man and dog formed a living chain against the current. "Good boy!" Daniel gasped, lungs screaming as he kicked upward. They broke the surface. The storm greeted them with fury, rain blinding, lightning splitting the sky. The wreck of the house spun downstream ahead of them, breaking into fragments. Behind, voices screamed from the bank, Pete and Nolan, frantic, helpless. "Hold on!" Pete's voice tore through the storm. "We've got you!" Daniel tried to swim toward them, but the current had other plans. It yanked him sideways, dragging him into a chute of white water between jagged rocks. Rex fought to stay with him, paddling furiously, the girl caught between them. "Stay with me!" Daniel shouted, though he didn't know if anyone could hear. A boulder loomed out of the flood, slick and black. The current slammed them toward it. Daniel twisted at the last second, taking the impact on his shoulder. Pain ripped down his arm, but the move saved the girl from being crushed. Rex clawed at the rock, barking in rage, teeth still locked on the child's sleeve. "Up!" Daniel snarled, shoving the girl onto the stone. He pushed until her tiny hands scrabbled over the top, clinging like a cat. Rex leapt after her, paws catching, muscles straining until he dragged himself up beside her. Daniel tried to follow, but his body failed. His arms trembled, his legs felt like lead. The river grabbed him again, pulling him off the rock. For a terrifying moment he was weightless, falling back into the dark. "No!" Nolan's scream pierced the storm. Rex barked once, frantic, then lunged. He dove off the rock and into the current, jaws clamping onto Daniel's harness strap. The shepherd strained, muscles bulging, refusing to let go as the river tried to tear them apart. Daniel's head broke the surface again. He coughed, gagged, but found the strength to grab the rock with his good arm. Together, man and dog hauled themselves upward, inch by brutal inch, until they collapsed beside the girl. For a moment, they lay there, 3 lives balanced on a slick boulder in the middle of a raging flood. Daniel pressed the child to his chest, feeling her tiny heartbeat against his ribs. She was crying now, sobbing into his shoulder. "Alive!" "Pete!" Daniel roared, voice shredded. "We need a line." On shore, Pete was already moving. He anchored the rope to a tree and hurled the coil with everything he had. The first throw fell short, swept away instantly. He cursed and tried again. This time, the rope slapped across the rock, snaking toward them. Rex pounced, catching the line in his teeth. He whipped his head and dragged it toward Daniel's hand. Daniel seized it, looping it around the girl first. "She goes before me," he shouted. Pete's face tightened, but he nodded. "On 3!" Daniel clipped the rope to the girl's waist and held her tight. "Listen to me," he said, forcing his voice calm despite the storm. "They're going to pull you across. Don't fight it. Hold still. Rex will follow. You're safe." The girl's eyes, wide and terrified, locked on his. She nodded, a trembling little motion, then buried her face against his shoulder. Daniel kissed her hair once, then lifted her into the water. "Now," he roared. Pete and Nolan hauled. The rope went taut, slicing through the current. The girl swung across the river like a pendulum, water slamming into her small body. She screamed, but the line held, and Pete dragged her onto the bank. Nolan wrapped her in his arms, sobbing with relief. "Rex, go!" Daniel ordered. The shepherd obeyed instantly, leaping into the flood with the rope still between his teeth. His body spun once, slammed against a wave, but he paddled furiously, never releasing the line. Pete and Nolan pulled hard, hauling him in. Rex scrambled onto shore, shook himself once, then barked wildly, eyes fixed on Daniel. Daniel was last. He clipped the rope to his harness, chest heaving. The current seemed to sense its prey slipping away and surged harder, dragging at him with claws of water. "Pull!" Pete screamed. Daniel kicked, fought, every muscle raw and burning. The rope jerked, cutting into his waist. For a moment, he thought it would snap, that the river would win at last. But then strong hands closed on his arm, Pete's, Nolan's, even the driver's trembling grip. Together, they hauled him onto the bank. Daniel collapsed onto the mud, coughing until his ribs felt like they'd split. Rex was there instantly, shoving his wet muzzle into Daniel's cheek, whining, licking, refusing to let him slip away. Daniel buried a hand in the shepherd's fur, grounding himself in that living warmth. The child he'd saved crawled to his side, sobbing into his sleeve. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. Daniel's throat closed. He wrapped his arm around her, Rex pressing against them both. The storm still raged, but rescue lights were closer now, sirens, spotlights, voices calling from upstream. The cavalry had arrived at last. Dozens of rescuers poured down the slope, ropes and stretchers in hand, shouting orders. Pete sagged with relief. "About damn time," he muttered, wiping blood from his forehead. Paramedics swarmed, lifting children, wrapping them in blankets, checking pulses. The woman sobbed as her toddler was carried to safety. The bus driver collapsed into the arms of another rescuer. Nolan slumped onto the mud, staring at Daniel with something close to awe. The boy stammered. "You just kept going." Daniel shook his head, resting his forehead against Rex's. "No. We kept going." The shepherd barked once, sharp and proud. As dawn bled slowly into the storm clouds, the flood still raged, but Silver Creek had survived the night. Families were whole again, children clung to their parents, and exhausted rescuers looked at the soldier and his dog with something like reverence. Daniel didn't seek it. He only sat there, one hand buried in Rex's fur, the other holding the little girl who had nearly been lost. The storm had tested them, tried to break them, but the bond between soldier and K9 had proven stronger than the river, stronger than fear, stronger than anything the night could throw. And as the first fragile rays of light caught through the clouds, Daniel whispered into Rex's ear, "We're still standing, partner. We're still standing." Rex leaned into him, eyes half closed, tail thumping once in the mud. For him, that was answer enough.